Welcome to Weekly Talkback. I'm Kevin Beers.
And I'm David Whitten.
And this is the show where we get to talk to Pastor Dave about his message from Sunday. This week was September 3rd, 2023, and the message was entitled, Touching the Untouchable. Now, in case you noticed, we're a little delayed in getting this one out between the Labor Day weekend and the, what do you call it, renovations on the office. Lots been going on here, so we got delayed a little bit, but here we are. So, let's just jump into this. What your message was all about was the fact that human touch, we're just wired for human touch. Mm-hmm. And Jesus wasn't afraid to touch people that the Jewish law declared as unclean because of skin disease, and there might have been some good reason for it. You know, like you said in your message that
some of it might be contagious.
Some of it's contagious, so therefore you don't want to come in contact with that.
Correct.
And it actually made me think about doctors and nurses today. While they do wear the PPE, they do get in there and they're touching people who have contagious diseases.
Yeah.
You know, they're risking themselves. They're willing to touch the untouchable.
Yeah, exactly.
When you were putting that message together, is that where you were going with some of that, or did you have a different angle in mind?
Well, I was leading up to the anointing service, and so the anointing service is all about touch, because not only are you using oil, but you're placing oil on a person's forehead. So I was leading up to that, but touch. I guess the central focus that I wanted for us to be attentive to is the idea that touch is vital, and we're living in a society that's fast becoming a touchless society due to various things, COVID being one huge example of it.
Sure.
Yeah.
Because in your message you state that like even preemies, premature babies,
right,
that if they're not touched, a lot of times they shut down and die.
Yeah.
Whereas just that simple act of touching makes a huge difference. There's studies that show that people that are hugged once a day are happier. There's all these studies that show this, and yet when it came to COVID, and I understand, because COVID was pretty severe. I was one of those victims.
Right.
But should we be more afraid of the disease, or should we be more afraid of the psychological effects of not being touched?
Well, yeah.
It's a balancing act.
Yeah, it really is a balancing act. When I was in Nigeria and served in Nigeria, there was a leper colony there, and it was established back in the 1920s. So even back then, they were kind of following the Jewish rules of separation. And there was a British doctor who worked there continuously. And at that time, this was 20 years ago, it was the first time that I did my stint in Nigeria. He wasn't using gloves as we would use. He washed his hands and moved amongst them. But he certainly took a huge risk in caring for those people. The doctors and the nurses and caregivers that were providing the care through the pandemic, I mean, they took risks to do so. Which leads me to, affirm, like what the doctor was doing in the leper colony, that we are to take certain risks. That's just a part of life. I mean, I think God would challenge us to go ahead and take some personal risks. Caregiving does require that, and so I just commend the doctors and the nurses and caregivers for not only providing care and in a safe environment as possible, but also I think that even with gloves on and masks on, they were providing touch as well, and offering.
Well, I'm going to disagree a little bit, because when I was laying in the hospital,
they wouldn't get close to you.
the nurses did. Now the nurses were wearing gloves, but they were real touchy. In doing their job. But the doctors, specifically the two doctors I had, they came in a complete air-sealed suit. And I understand why, because I understand what their job is. But it felt I just felt isolated from them
Yeah.
because of that.
Yeah.
And I totally get why, because I nearly died myself. I wouldn't wish that on anybody else. But there was that feeling. But the nurses, they had far less protection.
Yeah.
And I felt more cared for by them
Interesting.
because there was more of real touch.
Well, and there we go again, affirming, touching the untouchable message.
Right. Because essentially I was untouchable because
Yeah, exactly.
I nearly died. I could take other people
Absolutely.
with me.
Highly contagious. And so, yeah, they went beyond what normal society would have maybe found acceptable, but they went on. As Jesus, not only touching someone who could have been contagious, but Jesus touched someone that Jewish society said, they're untouchable, they're unclean, you can't do it. So Jesus crossed those kind of boundaries. Nurses in your situation crossed those kind of boundaries. The doctors in your situation, those specific two, did not.
Right. And I get, one was a pulmonologist, so she knew the risks.
Yes.
I mean, well, the other I don't know what the other doctor was, but like, while I totally understand it, it felt very isolating. Is all I'm saying is you know that it because their gloves were so thick, where the nurses it was much thinner, and like it was just very different.
Sure.
I want to shift over a little bit now to the anointing itself.
Okay.
And we actually touched on this in the last video when we were just talking about the ordinances of the Church of the Brethren, and we talked about how important the anointing service was for me.
Right.
Because I did read some studies too that talk about, like, when you get a massage, the reason they use oil is not just to make it easier necessarily, but that there's a healing property to the oil itself. You know, and then I mean, there's a lot of the articles were published by essential oils trying to push essential oils. I get that, but then there were some third party not connected to oil.
Right.
But they were talking about that there's the healing property of the oil, but then the massage itself with the actual touch. It isn't necessarily the tissue massage, which is obviously beneficial, but the touch itself is part of the healing process of why you're even there for a massage in the first place.
Yes, exactly. Biblically too. I mean, the whole history of anointing comes from the fact that earlier in the Old Testament, earlier in the life of the Jewish society, olive oil was considered had properties of healing, and so they used it thinking that that was part of the process of healing, and so it evolved into a smaller dose, but still significantly there, not only to symbolically represent God's healing spirit, but also because there historically had been understood as the oils of having, I didn't say that right, the oils having properties of healing.
I've actually seen some talking about using olive oil like on the bags in your eyes.
Oh yeah.
Where it holds moisture in the skin. But it's always olive oil. They never talk about using anything else.
Yeah. I don't know if olive oil is that much more pristine or better.
Yeah, I didn't do a deep dive into it. So
yeah, and nor did I. The oil that I do have, that I do use, is oil that is specifically for the purpose of an anointing. 99.9% of it is olive oil. It has a little bit of frankincense and a little bit of myrrh for the aromatic properties.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I know, like, when David was anointed as king, they poured the oil on his head.
Yeah.
And my understanding is in Jewish society, oil was actually used for hair care. I mean, there's like this long list of all the things that olive oil is good for. Right. And then when I first started searching on some of this, it all came down to nutritional properties and how it helps your body. And
right.
Like it'll calm something like irritable bowel syndrome, I guess, is one of those things.
Wow.
It helps in digestion, and it's good for your heart. Like there's this whole list of things that olive oil is good for. And you know, I don't know how much science is behind all that, or if someone's trying to sell something. It's getting hard to tell anymore.
Well, that's right. But whether there is actually healing properties in the oil, in the anointing service, from a Christian's understanding viewpoint, the oil represents the healing spirit already present, not necessarily in the oil, but in the atmospherics right there. That God's spirit is there. It's already healing, and the oil is just one way of representing that.
Okay, and you used the passage from James 5,
Mm-hmm.
Which I want to reiterate that, because I sought out the anointing service for healing when I was dealing with schizoaffective disorder and depression, and I do remember during the service, I invited certain people that were important in my life,
Mm-hmm.
and I basically called each one out as to why they were important for me.
Wow.
That was part of the service.
Wow.
And I remember when it was another Pastor Dave, but when he put the oil in my head, I felt this calmness,
Mm-hmm.
and the end result. I mean, it's a long story, everything that happened from that point forward, but the end result was being completely healed, being
Amazing.
off all medications, no symptoms,
Yeah.
the whole bit.
Yeah.
Because it wasn't a miraculous oil went on and I was healed. It was a process that followed.
Mm-hmm.
But what I believe is that anointing service unlocked
Yeah.
whatever was holding back
Yeah.
my ability to heal.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Yeah. Oh, I have in my own personal experiences, I have witnessed miracles coming out of the anointing service. Maybe not so radical, but even someone in pre-op who was getting a hysterectomy, who was visibly shaking because of her probably a little bit of cold, but mostly for her nervousness. When I anointed her with oil, you could just see her transform from a shaking, scared person to someone who was completely at peace. It was just a huge transformation. It works. I mean, I do believe in the anointing service, just not in a symbolic way, but in a way that actually offers healing. Mm-hmm. I truly do.
Yeah, I'm moving a lot toward or away from the symbols of the ordinances into there's really something here.
There's something here.
I'm not all there. I'm still trying to figure all that out.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm seeing things that are going on, and it's like there's a lot more here than just reenacting a symbol or something like that.
Right, I agree.
So,
I agree.
Okay, so we're going to wrap it up there. We want to know what you think about this. If you were actually at the anointing service on Sunday and were anointed, did it affect you in any way? Let us know down in the comments. If you didn't hear Pastor Dave's message on Sunday, a link will be down in the description of the video. You can go check it out there. And then we will see you next week.
Okay, take care. Be blessed.